Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. In today's video, I want to make a long one because I want to make an ultimate progression guide from levels 1 to 180 or 1 to 170 if you're on console for Wizard101. I want to detail every step that I would take if I was a new player or a returning player when questing through this game, all of the major side detours, the major farmed gear sets, how exactly to set up a deck. This is going to be a dense one. This is going to be mostly for newer and returning players, but if you're an older player, you can still watch this and probably get enjoyment out of it or add potential tips of your own in the comments below. If you're a new player, go look in the comments. Maybe there's some tips there. But without further ado, enough introduction. This is going to be a long one, so let's just get started with the ultimate progression guide for Wizard101 in 2026. Now, to start out, I feel like there's only one logical place to start, and that is at the very beginning when you first make your character, and that is what school you should pick. Now, let me just say something right at the beginning of this video, and that's the fact that for those of you that played a long time ago, it is not like it used to be. Every single school in this game is very good. Back in the day, some schools used to just flat out be better than others, and while that is still true, right now, every school in this game is good. They're all completely viable for endgame content. They all can actually hit now compared to where before they weren't able to. They have good damage stats, so on and so forth. Every school is viable. They're all options that you can pick. However, there are definitely some archetypes that are still in the game that might make you more interested in specific schools. So let me divide them into 3 specific sections that might make it easier for you to pick a choice. First up, we have the offensive schools. These are going to be Fire, Storm, and Myth. Now, the main differences between these, let's first talk about Fire. Fire is the damage over time school. They have high pierce, which means that they can go through things such as shields and enemy resist, and the base damage on their spells is very high as well, but they specialize in something called damage over times. Now, what this means is that rather than doing all of their damage up front, they'll do it over the course of a few rounds. So you can see here, like with Heckhound, it does 130 damage per pip over the course of 3 rounds. So this is a lot of damage, but it's not going to be instant. It's going to take a little bit of time. That means that Fire specializes more in blades. They're a little bit more drawn out rather than all up front, and that might interest some people more than others. Just picture it like a burn effect in Pokemon or something. It doesn't do everything up front, but it does continuously do damage over time. Now, next up, we have Storm, and Storm, similar to Fire, very offensive. They do very high base damage, a little bit low accuracy as well. However, instead of doing their damage over time, they do all of their damage up front. As you would imagine, this is the glass cannon of Wizard101. They do a ton of damage to the enemy, but they are very squishy themselves. Just to give you an example right here, looking at Storm Owl, it does 1330 to 1470 damage. If you compare that to all the other level 80 spells, I believe it does a solid 300 base damage higher than any of the rest of them. So Storm just does a lot of damage. However, again, low accuracy. You might be struggling a little bit early game because of how squishy you are. Fire is also similarly squishy, but not as squishy as Storm. The negative of Storm is going to simply be that they have a little bit less pierce than Myth and Fire, but that's not a huge negative. It's not going to negatively impact them at all in the long run. It's just that they tend to average a little bit lower. All right, next up and finally for the offensive schools, we have Myth. And Myth, similar to Storm, does all of their damage up front. They are very powerful in regards to the base damage on their spells, such as their 7 Pip AOE, which is really, really incredible. So unlike Fire, they do all of their damage up front. However, Myth is a little bit more interesting than Storm because they're not really supposed to be the dedicated hitting school like Storm. They aren't nearly as squishy. The base damage on their spells isn't as high, but what they do have is they have other utility that makes up for it. So what Myth is especially known for is going to be their shield removal spells. They have things such as Pierce and Shatter, which will remove shields from the enemy. They also have a lot of other spells that do that effect and hit at the same time, such as Wreck and Eden. Basically, Myth is a little bit more utility based than Storm, and on top of that, if you're looking for stats, Myth has the highest Pierce in the game right now, higher than any other school. It's actually very similar to Fire, only a little bit higher, but that does make Myth incredibly good at the hitting role. So I'll leave it up to you, but just in the broad strokes, what I would say, if you want to do a ton of damage and just be the main hitting school, Storm is your option. If you want to do damage over time, Fire is your option. If you want to do damage but have a little bit more utility and a little bit more pierce, Myth is your main option. All right, for our second category, we're going to have what I call the defensive schools, more geared towards support. They can still hit, but they are definitely way more defensive based than any other school in this game, and that is Life and Ice. Now, these two schools at max level can get easily the most amount of health in the game and also a ton of resist as well. Ice, in fact, can get all the way up to like 16,000 health and 100% 100% universal resist, which means they're basically immune to everything. It's a little bit crazy, the modern builds that are in this game, but let me just go over the major differences throughout the game. I would say life is going to be technically your better option, quote unquote. They are more geared towards healing spells, and they're very good at healing. However, they also still have quite good base damage on their spells, and they can hit almost just as well as a lot of other schools, which means life is certainly not bad. The damage on their gear as well makes them a little bit more balanced, but they're definitely still more geared towards that defensive category, and they will die a lot less, especially if you are using healing. As for ice also is very, very defensive. Obviously, they're designed to be the shielding school. They have a bunch of shields that they can use to resist the enemy. However, let me just say, if you want to pick ice, don't let me stop you, but ice is probably objectively the worst school in this game. I think that simply, if you're just looking at ice's utility with shields, it's a little bit worse than life. However, don't let that stop you if you really want to play the ice school, because as I said, every school in this game is good, and ice has some crazy max level builds. It's just that throughout the game, they're a little bit weaker. They don't get a blade until level 38, which is a major problem, and it does make ice feel exceptionally weak in the damage department, but again, they will never die. So that's going to be the main benefit of the two defensive schools. Likely, they will never die when compared to the offensive schools, but it's going to take a lot longer to do battles. Life a little bit less so. Life still has pretty good damage. For the final two schools that we have the Jack of all trades schools. These are the schools where they are realistically good at everything, or at least decent at everything, and bad at nothing. And that is going to be balance and death. Now, balance, as you would imagine, is balanced. They have good damage, good resist, good health, good accuracy, so on and so forth. Balance doesn't really have that many downsides outside of the fact that their blade is a little bit weaker than every other school's blade. Their blade only does a plus 25 rather than a plus 35, which isn't a huge problem, but it does make balance a little bit weaker. They're very, very good at support, and it's overall just a very solid choice. I would say it's probably the least picked school in the game, so if that interests you as well, you could also pick it because of that. Now, finally, we have death, and death is what many people consider to be the easy mode of this game, because death, similar to balance, is a very good jack of all trades. They have amazing support spells, they have really good weakness spells, the damage on their cards is really good as well, along with most of their stats, and defensively they're pretty good as well. So they're just good at everything. However, they're also kind of great at everything. They have access to drain spells, which means that every time they hit an enemy, they will gain 50% of that health back on a drain spell, and with those, they realistically will never die, because whenever you're low, you can just hit with a drain spell. That does mean that death is just fundamentally really, really good in this game, and again, they're considered to be the easy mode. They're by far the best school for PvE in this game for anything that's not PvP related, and because of that, death is a very popular choice. Now, that pretty much wraps up this major school section. Just pick what you want. I listed all of the main strengths and weaknesses of all of them, basically. However, don't let that influence you too much. Pick whatever you think is fun, because again, at the end game, every school is good in this game, so it does not matter exactly what you pick. All right, next up, let's go over what stats to focus on in this game, and this is not going to be a long section. I'm going to just go over the bare minimum. However, let me just stress, the game does not really tell you what are good stats to focus on, and because of that, I find a lot of newer players do tend to make mistakes here. So if you're a new player, focus up and let's learn a little bit. Now, when you open your stat page right here, obviously you have health, mana, damage, resistances, and accuracy. Now, the two most important stats on this entire page are going to be your damage stat and your accuracy stat. Now, you may notice right here, there is damage, and then there is another box underneath it. That is what is called flat damage versus percent damage. Percent damage is the top number, and this is the one that is very, very important. This adds a percent to your spells and is way better than flat damage. Flat damage, as you would imagine, instead of being a percent, is just additive. So say I have 258 flat damage rather than percent damage. Rather than that spell doing multiple times stronger like it would with the percent damage, it only would add 250. So say it was a spell that did 500 damage, that spell would only do 750 with 250 flat damage, instead of doing all the way in the multiple thousand range with the percent damage. So percent damage is very, very important. There are some people that still don't know what flat damage does. That is what it does. Now, resistances, admittedly, in this game don't matter as much. You can focus on them. There is flat versus percent resist, so I'll leave it up to you whether you want to focus on it or not. For specific schools, resistances are going to be better, especially in the early game when you're a bit more squishy, but ultimately, it's not something that you should sacrifice a bunch of damage for. Now, finally, for this page, we have accuracy, and accuracy is going to be one of the most important stats in this game. For accuracy, you really want to have maximum accuracy. So to know what your max accuracy is, go to your spells, look at what the accuracy stat is in the bottom left of them. So you can see here, Mitt's accuracy is 80%. That means I need at least 20 of the accuracy stat to never fizzle. For every school, there is an amount of accuracy you need. Reaching max accuracy is very, very important, and every school can reach max accuracy around level 60. So that's going to be very important for not fizzling. Now, Now, for the advanced character statistics page, these are the more in-depth stats. Let me just say a lot of these are not going to be something that you're going to focus on that much. Critical rating is good, but you never want to sacrifice other stats to get higher critical rating. The crit that you get on your gear is just going to be enough. As you quest through the game and farm good gear, it will have good crit and you will be fine. Block rating, similarly, don't even look at this stat. It is not important almost at all. What is important is going to be armor piercing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for the different schools with Myth and Fire get a lot of armor piercing, but every school can get a good amount. And what this does is it allows you to pierce through shields and resist on the enemies, which is going to be exceptionally important later on. Now, this is going to be a stat that doesn't show up that much in the early game, but once you get to around level 60 all the way up to 100, that is when armor piercing starts becoming important. And I'll get into it a little bit later with the jewel section. However, you can get very good armor piercing just with your gear. And by the end game, you are going to have somewhere between 35 up to 50 armor piercing. And that is around where you want to be. For early game, don't focus on the stat, but just know it is important later on. Now, for the second page of the advanced character statistics, pip conversion, this just allows you to convert power pips into regular pips when you only use half of that power pip. So say I had a power pip and I used a 1 pip spell. If I had high pip conversion, I might retain that pip rather than consuming the full power pip. Power pip chance, obviously this is the chance you get a power pip. Later on, this is going to be important as well. Getting this up to 100% is going to be really, really good. Shadow pip rating dictates how much you get shadow pips, which I'll go into a little bit later. And then finally, arch mastery rating. You start generating this naturally at level 50. This allows you to get arch mastery pips, which are going to be very, very useful for lore spells. You need them for lore spells and you need them a bit later on. Realistically, you aren't going to need this early on at all. However, I am going to briefly go over in the jewel section if you get a lore spell early on somehow, like in a pack. Now, that's basically it for all of the major stats. Again, focus on damage, accuracy, power pip chance, and armor piercing. That is going to be the 4 main stats in this game. Everything else is good, but not something that you should sacrifice any one of those stats for. All right, at this point, you know the bare minimum. You know what school you should pick and the basics. Let's move on to the actual progression of the game. Let's start progressing. Starting off with gear sets. Now, realistically, from levels 1 to 30, you do not need to farm any gear whatsoever. What I would recommend doing is coming to Elix Silverfist right here at the bazaar. It'll show you exactly where it is when you come here for the first time. And from here, you can buy gear every 5 levels. I'll leave it up to you whether you feel like you need a gear upgrade or not. However, again, like I mentioned in the stats section, focused on accuracy and percent damage at this point, and that is going to be what you focus on all the way at least until level 30. And realistically, you're not going to get that good of damage stat, but you can see here you can get at least semi-decent gear, and you can just buy it for gold. Again, while some people will recommend farming gear, I don't think you need to farm gear whatsoever until level 30 and 40. And on top of that, you don't even need to farm a full set of gear until probably around level 60. The bazaar is going to be your best friend, and it was for a long time in this game. Even with all the gear sets added, I still think it is going to be the best method for early game progression. Now let's go over a very, very useful basic tip in this game that is going to really help you if you ever get stuck in the early game. And that is monstrous treasure cards and their ability to get you out of sticky situations. So if you come to the commons right here and go to the housing tours, which you can see is right next to Zeke, if you enter the building right here, talk to Marilla Winspar, go to top rated and then top rated dorms, find an Arcanum apartment. So you can see that there are many of them right here. Just click on one that's going to work on PC and console. So keep that in mind, and then walk backwards immediately upon going to it. You can see you end up in the Arcanum. Now this is a quote unquote late game area. You unlock this around level 106. And from this, you can get access to a treasure card vendor right here by the name of Librarian Fitzhume. In the astral section, there is a treasure card called Monstrous. It costs 250 gold a pop, which means it is very expensive in the early game. However, what this allows you to do is if you buy one of them, go to your treasure card deck and then go to your astral treasure cards and add it to your deck. You can then proceed to discard a card, draw the treasure card, and use this to enchant a spell. This will add 175 base damage to that spell, which in the early game, if you look at the earlier game spells, that is going to be a lot. Like just for example, with Troll here, it will be doing around double the amount of damage as it should be doing, plus your percent damage stat, whatever. This is going to be enough to kill basically any enemy in Krokotopia, and with a blade, probably almost any enemy in Marleybone as well. And obviously you can use these to enchant any spell in this game. Let me just personally say, while some people will recommend using these for almost every encounter, I personally find it is a lot more fun if you only use them in like boss encounters or specific situations, because it does kind of trivialize the early game. You were not intended to be able to access these when the game game first came out, obviously. However, with this being added, with housing tours being added, it does mean that you have access to Monstrous TC as early as like level 3 or something. So keep that in mind. If you ever get stuck, this is going to be a great tip to help you. All right, next up for early game progression, and something that I would heavily recommend everyone to do, is unlocking daily assignments at level 13, I believe. If you come to Aegon's stats right here in Ravenwood, he will give you a daily assignment, which, as you imagine, every single day he will go give you an area to visit or an enemy to beat. This will take maybe 5 minutes out of your day, and obviously it only gives you areas and enemies that are things you've already unlocked, so you will never get something that you can't actually do. From there, you do a daily assignment that nets you a little bit of gold, potentially some crowns, an item, or very specifically, the best thing is on day 15, you get a gold skeleton key. Now, this is not going to be the most useful thing for every school. However, what it does allow you to do is it does allow you to unlock lore spells, and doing this as soon as possible and making sure to upkeep it every single day will net you an unlimited supply of gold skeleton keys. It's simple, it's easy, it's something I'd recommend everyone to do, and every day, log in, go to Aegon stats, do your daily assignment. You can't lose progress, so if you miss one, it'll still stay on day 7. I believe I haven't done one in like a week now, so I'm still on day 7. However, every day you sign on, just do the daily assignment and then move on from there. Again, only going to take you 5 minutes. Very easy, and especially in the early game, this extra gold, the extra crowns, and the extra items are going to be very, very useful. All right, next up, let's talk about jewels, because jewels are very important to this game, and I'm not going to go massively in depth with them. However, the reason why I'm mentioning them now is because you do unlock jewels at level 15, and this lends itself to the Arch Mastery stat, which I'll get into in a minute. Now, you unlock the quest from Eloise right here again at level 15, and she will send you to the jewel shop in the shopping district. Now, the reason why jewels are so important is they can give you a lot of extra stats that will round out your build massively. So for example, there are triangle slots, and triangle slot jewels can give you either accuracy or power pip chance. Both of these things are very, very important to max out, and early game, an accuracy jewel can be a lifesaver. Now, specifically why I'm mentioning this now and right here in this section is because of the fact that if you want to unlock Arch Mastery early, this is the only way to do it. Now, Arch Mastery, as I said, starts generating naturally at level 50, and that allows you to use lore spells. So if you look at like Athena Battle Site right here, it costs a myth pip. From unlocking the Arch Mastery stat, you start generating school pips. Once you generate that school pip, you can use that spell. You can change the default one in your deck right here, or you can change it in battle. Very easy system. I don't really need to have a full guide on that. However, at level 15, if you come to Catherine Rockhammer right here after doing that quest, you can see that for 10,000 gold, you can buy an Arch Mastery jewel, and that will unlock the ability to start generating those pips as soon as level 15. Just buy an item that has that jewel slot in it. Almost every item in this game has a tier slot, so just buy a tier jewel, socket it into the tier slot, call it a day. That will get you Arch Mastery rating, and that is very important. As for other jewels, I'm not going to go that in depth with all of them until a little bit later on. However, the most important ones are going to be health jewels, pierce jewels, which you start getting at like level 55, I believe, accuracy jewels, power pip jewels, and then later on, we're going to have item card jewels and percent damage jewels, so we don't need to worry about those until like all the way in level 170. So that's just going to be the bare minimum for jewels. Keep in mind, they can be very useful, and if you need Arch Mastery, you can unlock that early. All right, now at this point, you know a lot of the basics. Let's get into 3 very important spells that are all around the same level, which is from levels 20 to 25 that I would heavily recommend training, starting off with Reshuffle. Now, if I open my map right here in Colossus Boulevard, right next to the teleporter hub and like Mindy Pixie Crown over here, there is this secret house with its lights off. If you go inside of it, there is a trainer here named Mildred Farseer. First off, you can train Life Trap if you're a life wizard and you're wondering where that is, but you can also train the spell of Reshuffle. What Reshuffle does is basically it prevents you from ever losing a battle by running out of spells, because you can cast this, and when you cast this, it will reshuffle all cards back into the deck, so you will never run out of cards. I heavily recommend training this at level 20 just to have it, just to make sure if you need it in the future, you can put it in your deck and reshuffle your cards. Next up at level 22 is going to be the spell of Feint, which is a death spell that every single school and every single wizard should train. So once you reach level 22, train all the way up to it, and from there you have Feint. What Feint does is it is a 1 pip plus 70 trap on the enemy and a plus 30 on yourself, which is going to be one of the best buffs in this game. It is going to be instrumental in killing pretty much every boss in the game, and if you're a support school and supporting other wizards like a storm wizard, this is going to be instrumental for making them do a lot of damage. Again, it's a universal trap and not just a death trap, which is great. So every wizard should train Feint. All right, next up at level 25, we have Elemental and Spirit Blade, which you can train from Niles Niles, the balance tree, right here in the Crocosphinx in Crocotopia. So if you go to him and train, I believe it's level 25, you can unlock Elemental Blade and Spirit Blade, which for 1 pip will put up an Elemental Blade, which is a Storm, Ice, and Fire Blade, or a Spirit Blade, which is a Myth, Life, or Death Blade, which are really, really good. Later on, you can stack these. It's going to be good for support schools. It's going to be good for your own school. It's going to be good for stacking these along with your regular blade. If you use these along with your regular blade and a feint, you will kill pretty much every boss in almost this entire game, especially in the early game. So keep that in mind. These are the spells I'd recommend training around this level. Let's move on to the next thing, which is early game deck setups. And the reason why I haven't mentioned this up until now, and I'm not going to go that in depth with it, is the fact that early game, you don't really need to focus on specific deck setups, and I'm not going to get into the specifics. I just want to give you the bare minimum. With an early game deck, there are a few things that you want. First off, you want to make sure that you have feint, you want to make sure that you have blades, and then a few hitting spells. And the most basic and important thing here is keep your deck set up a little bit on the smaller side. It is so tempting, and I think the game tries to push this to just fill your deck with every spell that you get. Like, if you look at this, this is what most early game deck setups look like. A lot of people, I remember this is what, as a kid, my deck setup looked like, and this sucks because the more cards you have in your deck, the harder it is to draw a card that you're looking for. Your hand is 7 cards big, which means 7 is going to be almost like a magic number. It kind of revolves around that. And I will say my decks, I don't tend to go past 2 rows. If it goes past 2 rows, it's a little bit too big. Obviously later on you can make slightly bigger decks, but for the early game, just stick to feints, a few attacking spells, a few blades, and call it a day. And the most important thing that I'm going to go over in the last thing for the early game deck section is make sure that you have the 4 pip AoE in your deck. This is going to be so useful. For life and death, you can't get a 4 pip AoE until a little bit later, but for every other school, a 4 pip AoE, it will be very useful against any mob enemy fight. Just blade up, get up to 4 pips, and then cast it, and it will kill pretty much everything. It's very useful. You want a few of these in your deck at all times for an early game deck, and that's the bare minimum that you need to know. Outside of that, realistically, I don't think there's anything to talk about for early game decks. All right, now we're jumping all the way up to level 30 with the first major side quest that is recommended for every single school to do. However, this is also the first major farmable gear set in the game, and I'll get into it in a minute, but I don't really recommend farming it. However, it is still very important that you do this. Now, once you reach level 30, if you come to Cyrus Drake, he will mention the fact that you have been invited to something called the Immortal Games, which this starts the Aquila questline. Now, the Aquila questline in the beginning basically just revolves you going to the library a few times, going to Romulus the Cyclops, going back and forth, and from there you'll get to a point where you can actually go to the world of Aquila. Now, upon using this chariot, you can see, boom, here we are, and you can unlock the first dungeon of Mount Olympus. Now, this is so vital to do at level 30 because you unlock the item, the Sky Iron Hasta. This is going to be your best friend as a wand until at least level 50 and probably even further past that. Back in the day, people used this all the way from level 30 up to like level 125. Nowadays, there are way better level 100 wands. However, keep in mind, this wand was amazing. Now, the best thing about this wand is twofold. First off, you get it as a guaranteed drop every time you do Mount Olympus, which means you don't need to farm for it at all. It's guaranteed. You can just go do Mount Olympus once and call it a day. However, the bigger thing about this wand is going to be the stats. That plus 10% damage is going to be amazing. It's going to be great for every school, and even bigger than that is going to be the starting power pip. This is one of the earliest starting power pip wands you can get in this game. Technically, there's earlier wands, but I would not recommend farming for those. However, this will allow you to do things like cast your 4 pip AoE either round 1 or round 2, which is so good. Now, let me quickly go into the Zeus gear and why I personally would not recommend farming it all that much. Now, the Zeus gear is really good. If you look at it from the crafting vendor right here, it is amazing. Specifically, the robes give you anywhere from like 8% to 15% damage, which is huge at this level. It's going to be great. However, the problem with the Zeus gear is with the Aquila Chronicle update, which if you don't know what that is, I'm not going to get too into it. However, it restructured the pity system of Mount Olympus and how the drops worked a lot. It did make it so that it is a little bit harder to farm for Zeus gear. So what I would personally recommend is only doing Mount Olympus at least a few times. If you get a drop, perfect. If you don't, just move on with your life. You can absolutely still use Bazaar gear around this level and be completely fine. You can use Bazaar gear all the way again up until level 60, which means while this can be useful, I personally wouldn't waste your time doing Mount Olympus all that much. Just don't let it dictate your entire game. A lot of people spent like 15 to 20 hours farming for Zeus gear. It's just a massive waste of time. You could just move on with your life and continue questing using Bazaar gear and be completely fine. All right, next up, we have an item that is PC only. So if you are currently on on console as of making this in mid-2026 of July of 2026, this is not out yet. If this video came out like over a year ago, you should absolutely check if this is in the game. The best way to check is to go to your badge section, go to the 4 dungeons badges, and if there is 25 badges, that means the Barkingham Chronicle update is out. Now, what exactly is this item? Well, first off, you need to do all of the Barkingham quest line, so come to Private Kinchley here at level 40 and do the Barkingham Palace. Just go through the entire thing. If you get a piece of gear, it's going to be pretty good, but you absolutely don't need to farm it. It's not a big deal if you don't get anything. However, once you finish all of Barkingham Palace, then proceed to go to Dr. Von Kassenstein in Scotland Yard over here. He will give you a side quest where he says his monster's gone on a rampage, he's going all crazy, like, you need to go stop him. So you track down his notes, find the monster has gone to Barkingham Palace and has kidnapped the queen, and then you need to beat him in an encounter. Now, this boss is actually pretty easy. He doesn't have any major cheats outside of, I believe, no feints, so just blade up and trap up as you would usual and kill him. He's not a big deal, not going to be a major issue. However, from beating this quest, you get the guaranteed item drop of the Queen's Guard Artavus, which is going to be almost just as good as the Skyrim Hasta is as a guaranteed item, and it's going to last you all the way from levels 40 all the way up until at least level 100, and probably even further than that if you don't feel like farming the Yevgeny Athame. This Athame is huge. The jewel sockets on it are great. Just keep in mind, it's just overall going to be a necessary item from now on. With the Skyrim Hasta and the Queen's Guard Artavus, you're going to have 22% guaranteed universal damage at level 40, which is quite a bit. On top of all the rest of your gear, you're going to be getting up into the 50 damage range very easily. This has 16% power pip as well, really good sockets, so you can socket pierce jewels and a power pip or an accuracy jewel onto it. It's just really good. So make sure you go do this. Let's move on. All right, next up, we have our next side detour. We've been questing through the game with a few detours in Aquila and then Barkingham Palace. Let's get to our next major detour, and that is going to be Grizzleheim and Wintertusk. Now, I would personally recommend doing these around level 40. Wintertusk alone will net you a lot of extra XP, boost your level significantly, and make you a lot stronger going into Dragonspyre than you would be normally compared to where you were before. And you should reach level 40 around the end of Mushu. That is going to make the most sense, and that will allow you to go into Dragonspyre a lot stronger. So go to Merlambros, get the Grizzleheim side quest, and come to the world of Grizzleheim. Now, just go through the base world in of itself. It's not going to be that big of a deal. The main issue is going to be Ravenscar, because Ravenscar is pretty long and some of the encounters are a little bit rough. However, if you keep in mind Monstrous TC and Feints, you should be more than fine to get through Grizzleheim. However, here we get into the more important thing, which is Wintertusk. Now, upon finishing all of Grizzleheim, you then proceed to go back to Merlambros, and I believe he will give you a quest called like Cold News or something where he talks about Wintertusk. Then you come back to Grizzleheim and you find that there is a new section called Wintertusk. Now, Wintertusk is going to be useful for so many reasons. Again, first off, the main one is going to be the massive XP boost. However, the second one is going to be the fact that you unlock some side quests, like Eric Weirdrune in Grizzleheim has a level 35 spell quest and a level 55 spell quest. A lot of your school quests, such as the level 48 pet quest, I believe also leads you to Wintertusk, so keep in mind you are going to want to do this at some point. However, just quest through this as you would normally. You might struggle a little bit if you do go into team up or find someone to help you, whatever. You're probably going to need help for Nastron, which is the final dungeon over here, and upon completing this world and doing this entire side detour, you should reach level 50 to 55 before entering Dragonspyre. I might even recommend going as far as to doing the side quest of Wintertusk. However, personally, I would recommend doing Wintertusk at level 40. All right, at this point, upon finishing Wintertusk, you have reached level 50, and 50 is a very important level in this game now. Back in the day, it didn't used to do anything major. Now there is so many different things that level 50 does that this will be kind of a little bit of a halt in the progression guide. Starting out, let's get into the most important aspect of reaching level 50, and that is going to be Dragonspyre World Gear. Dragonspyre World Gear was introduced in 2022, and with that, they introduced something called the Tier 2 Dragonspyre World Gear, which can be sold in the bazaar. What that means is there is a full set of really good level 50 gear in the bazaar just sitting here. As soon as you reach level 50, you can go get that. So sort by level and school and then find it right here. You'll be able to tell immediately what it is, because when you look at it, man, this gear is crazy. So just look at the myth hat. It gives 14 damage, 3% myth pierce, 5 resist, and 181 health. That is going to be amazing for level 50, like far and above literally anything you'd encountered up until that point. Again, just scroll through and find it. You may see that there's a little bit of weaknesses to some of it. However, with a full set of this gear, you will very, very easily be able to get from level 50 all the way up until probably even level 70 or 80. There is some level 60 gear I'd recommend farming. However, just keep in mind, once you reach level 50, go buy this. You're going to be able to find wands as well, which are an upgrade to the Skyrim Hasta, you can see pierce, damage, it's overall incredibly good. There are going to be rings as well, which are going to be amazing. The Queensguard Artavus is going to be the mainstay of your Athame. However, rings going to be a major ring upgrade as well. Just overall very solid once you reach level 50. And again, it's going to cost gold, which means you'll very easily be able to get this. All right, for our next section, this is one that's going to be a little bit controversial because I think some people would actually recommend doing this a little bit earlier than I did. However, this is when I would start focusing on pet training, maybe not even making a perfect pet, but at least getting a decent pet. At level 50, at this point, you should guaranteed at least have your school pet, because training that pet up to adult, you can then proceed to go to Pet Pavilion to hatch. Now, I'm not going to get into the depths of pet making and the basics of it in this video because that would take way too long. It takes like a full 20 minutes to explain pet training to you. I have a full video on that if you want. It's going to be in a link in the description if you want to watch it. And I also have a video on how to make a perfect pet, which is important as well. However, just a bare minimum to get you started. What I'd recommend doing is doing the dance game 25 times, because as soon as you've done it 25 times, you can then proceed to skip the game. Skipping the game will not get you the XP from actually doing it, but it will get you the XP from feeding them a pet snack. Now, the reason why I recommend doing this at level 50 is at this point, if you've done Wintertusk and you've quested up to level 50, you likely have a lot of gold, and from questing, you will get a lot of gold. But upon doing Wintertusk, you also have access to good gold farming spots, like Halfang in Vesterland is going to be an amazing gold farming spot at this level. And from there, you can buy pet snacks from the bazaar, or you can go buy them from like Wallaru. If you want to watch my pet snack guide video, you can watch that as well. But what I'd recommend doing at this level, using my perfect pet guide, you may know that there are specific pets in the kiosk that have been made for new players to get perfect pets. These are called exclusive pets. You are guaranteed to get your pet back and not their pet back. That is what an exclusive does. Now, quickly to throw up this graphic on the screen right here, this is what you need to hatch with depending on your school. Just find it in the hatching kiosk. There should be many of them. And from hatching with them with your pet, you're guaranteed to get your own pet back with at least better talent than it had before. So for example, just right here for Myth, Young Patch, the Phyclops is what is recommended to hatch with a Myth. From doing it, you may see it costs 45,000 gold. If your pet's only an adult, it's going to cost 15,000 gold, which is really good. From there, you can hatch, train that pet up, then you can go hatch again if you want to, rinse and repeat until you get at least a decent pet. Why I have this right here around the level 50 section is because at this point you should have a good gold farm in Vesterland. You should have your level 48 school pet as well from doing that side quest. And again, it should be pretty easy to get a decent pet up until this point. This is what I'd recommend starting. You don't need to make a perfect pet. You don't need to go all out and make something insane, but at the bare minimum, I would recommend trying to get a dealer talent and mighty, and then maybe a giver or two, and that will have you set for the entire rest of the game. But in the background, for the next sections, you do want to make a perfect pet at some point, so just keep coming back to the pet pavilion and hatching when you can. All right, so this next section is actually very important because this is where you can train enchants. Now, the reason why this is so important is usually you can't train these until you get to Celestia, and by this point you are level 50 without likely even stepping foot in Dragonspyre. So you need a way to get them early, and luckily there is actually a way. If you go to the housing tours and go back to the Arcanum, as I showed you how to do before, go to the Arcanum apartment and then walk out backwards. If instead of going to Librarian Fitzhume right here, you bank a right and go into the Astral Trainer over here, you can actually train all of the spells early without getting to that trainer. You can start training them at level 50, and there is like 6 different enchants that you can train. So I believe Strong is at level 50, Giant is at level 52, Monstrous at 54, Gargantuan at 58, and then from there, there's a little bit of a gap, but obviously you will likely reach this level before even stepping foot in Celestia. So that is why this is so important, because you can train these technically early. Now, there is another second more important thing about this, and that's the fact that with this method, you can actually get Colossal early. Colossal, usually you need to get to Drum Jungle in Zafaria to train that, but fun fact, you can actually train it early if you just come to Kyber and Stellar Gazer right here. If you reach level 64, you don't even need the prerequisite quest. You can just go here, train up to Colossal, and get that before even likely stepping foot in Zafaria either. So keep in mind, since you did Wintertusk, this is going to be very important since you likely won't be able to step foot in Celestia until you're already around level 60. So you might even get Colossal before finishing Celestia, which is pretty dang cool. All right, next up, let's talk about something that's been delayed a little bit, and that is these 7 Pip AOEs. Now, you unlock these at level 48 technically. However, if you have been following this progression guide, you likely hit level 48 way before you could actually get these spells, because they are locked behind the labyrinth. To actually get them, you need to go do the labyrinth, and to unlock the labyrinth, you need to do Dragonspyre. If you did Wintertusk before Dragonspyre, you are level 48 and you haven't even started Dragonspyre, which means that I need to delay this a little bit. At this point, I'm going to mention it now because the next section is going to be on deck building, and 7 pip AoEs are an integral part of deck building. However, let's just talk about the 7 pip AoEs. These spells are broken and they are your mainstay on literally every single deck from when you get them until the end game. Now, you can use whatever spells you want. However, just keep in mind, objectively, 7 pip AoEs are the best spells in this game. The reason why is because KingsIsle back in the day around 2020 decided that every single school needed a staple spell. And so what they did was they took the 7 pip AoEs and they removed the AoE nerf that every other AoE get and made them powerful. Now, the AoE nerf, basically every AoE spell will do 25% less damage because it hits all enemies. They decided to make it so these 7 pip AoEs do full damage, which means if you look at it, Orthrus, Myth's 7 pip AoE, does the exact same base damage as Medusa, which costs a full pip higher, which is a bit interesting because it means these 7 pip AoEs are the best spells in the game. So I'm going to mention them now. Absolutely, as soon as you can unlock them, you want to go do this, and you unlock them around the level of the labyrinth, not when you hit 48. You're going to hit 48 likely way before you do the labyrinth. You could probably start the quest, find someone to teleport you into the labyrinth, and then do it from there. However, keep in mind, you're going to be a little bit locked when it comes to the 7 pip AoEs. Which leads us to our next section, and another huge recommendation is that at this point, once you start training up enchants and whatnot, this is when I would personally recommend making 2 decks. Now, what these are going to do is these are going to allow you to have a smaller deck. I call it an attack deck. Some people call it a mob deck, whatever. This is going to be for mob fights and non-boss encounters, and then a boss deck. Obviously, this is for specific boss encounters. Now, for an attack deck, this is going to be very, very simple. You want to keep it at 7 because 7, again, is that magical number. You draw everything first round. You want 3 enchant spells, 2 small AoEs. So there's going to be a 4 pip AoE for every school at this point, and your 7 pip AoE, which you unlocked at level 48, followed by some kind of buff. A lot of people recommend Frenzy, which is a level 110 spell, which you're not going to get yet, but at this point you can just put a blade in there if you want. What this will do is it will allow you to have range. It will allow you to have 2 small hits to take out the mobs really fast, and a major hit if you really want to. You could blade up and use that against the mobs. It's just going to be useful to have this secondary side deck for those mob encounters. Now, on top of that, you have the boss deck. Now, for a boss deck, this is going to be a slightly bigger deck. Again, I probably wouldn't recommend going over 2 rows. Now, for a boss deck, what I would personally recommend is first off having a reshuffle, because if you run out of spells, that's going to be a killer. Having a reshuffle prevents you from running out of spells. From there, I would have a 7 pip AoE because that's going to be your major attacking spell, potentially a major single hit. So I have Scion right here, but you could have any like 8 pip spell, 9 pip spell, so on and so forth. A single hit for that boss, a small AoE in case you don't kill, or just some kind of small low pip spell just in case you don't kill, along with feints and blades. That is going to be what your boss deck is. Later on, you're going to add more to this. However, this is when I would recommend making a mob deck and a boss deck, because otherwise it's just a little bit overwhelming to have to switch all the time, like having to add spells to your deck, remove spells from your deck. This is when I'd recommend making an attack deck and a boss deck. All right, next up, we have another stop in the progression guide, but this is only for 2 specific schools. If you are not a life or death, this is not going to affect you, but this is the point when I would heavily recommend going out of your way to farm your 4 pip AoE from one of the gold key bosses. Now, if you're a life or death, you may have noticed you don't have a 4 pip AoE, unlike everyone else. I would have personally recommended trying to farm it in the background up until now if you're one of those schools. However, if you didn't by this point, this is when I would recommend having it, because having a mob deck at this level and having the ability to use that 4 pip AoE is going to be very important. You should have enough gold skeleton keys from doing daily assignments. If you don't, from completing all of the main quests and side quests in a world, you get a gold skeleton key, and you should need around 7 to 8 gold keys to actually be able to unlock these. For life, you want to come to King Boar right here in Saverstead Pass. He will be a rather simple boss with a simple cheat. If you want to watch my video on how to farm rat spin, go watch that. It's going to be rather simple, and you want to unlock that around this level if you haven't already. For death, you want to come to the Science Center in Celestia, which you may or may not have unlocked yet. If you haven't, you need to quest a little bit further into Celestia to actually unlock this, but coming to the Science Center right here, you have Drowned Dan, and from him, you can farm Ship of Fools, which Ship of Fools is going to be absolutely amazing. So keep that in mind. If you haven't unlocked those by this point, you definitely absolutely should. Now at this point, you should just keep questing for a little while while. I think the last thing I mentioned was you should be at the end of Mushu and then do Wintertusk, and then you hit around level 50, which is where all of this new information came from. Now just keep questing. Get through Dragonspyre with that Dragonspyre world gear and get to Celestia. Now, the very start of Celestia will have you going through a little bit of a minor side quest where you learn about Arch Mastery and you learn about spell weaving. And this is the point where I would recommend doing the bare minimum for spell weaving and then moving on with your life and going to Celestia. This is going to be very, very useful for every school. Specifically, Balanced Wizards is almost necessary to do this. So you learn about spell weaving right here, and then you want to go to the Storm tree and weave into Storm. What weaving into Storm allows you to do is for every single school at rank 1 except for Storm, if you're a Storm, you can skip this section. You unlock your blade, which if you set your school pip to a Storm pip, you can cast this in one round. It is a plus 45 blade of your school and Storm, and later on, if you have a Sharpened blade, it's going to go up to a plus 55. I'd recommend doing this at level 50. Just get it out of the way, do the weaving tome, do a little bit of weaving, and unlock this blade. The reason why this is so important for a Balanced Wizard is instead of being a regular blade, it is a convert blade. This will make it so that your balanced spells, instead of doing balance damage, do storm damage. This is going to be so useful on any boss that is a balance boss, because balance does not have a convert spell, and that has been their main weakness up until now. With this blade, you can then proceed to convert your spells and then do storm damage instead, which is really, really good. So do weaving as soon as you unlock it, right at the very beginning of Celestia, and then you can move on from there. All right, after that massive information dump, I hope you're still with me, because this is when things are going to slow down a little bit. There was a lot around this time to talk about. Now it's going to get a little bit more sporadic, starting with the level 60 gear set. This is when I would absolutely recommend taking your time to farm some gear, because level 60 is a very big milestone and there isn't really another gear set between level 60 and 100. So this gear set will last you a full 40 levels, and I recommend going out of your way to get as good as you can. Now, go watch my level 60 gear guide if you want a full in-depth guide on it. However, just the bare minimum, there is a ton of different gear sets you can farm, but if you want a solid enough gear set, go for a mixture of the Gorgon robe, potentially Waterworks hat and boots, go for the Atavistic or Gorgon wand, the Queensguard Artavus for the Athame, and then the Atavistic amulet and rings. The Atavistic amulet can be farmed from Akalos in the Crustacean Empire, the Atavistic rings can be farmed from Queen Calypso, and then the Gorgon gear you can craft using Olympian dust from Mount Olympus. Waterworks in of itself is just a side quest that you start in Triton Avenue. Now again, if you want a full in-depth guide, go click on that video because I show exactly where to start all of those, and it's going to be a little bit better than this. However, just keep in mind, level 60 gear is so important because you are not going to farm gear for at least another 40 levels, which means it's very important to get as powerful as possible at level 60 right now so that Arc 2 doesn't feel like a struggle. Even with a really good level 60 setup, Arc 2 still will probably feel a little bit of a slog in Chrysalis, just because KingsIsle has still decided that it is not time to make a level 80 gear set yet, which I still don't know why. But let's move on from this section and move on to the next major milestone. All right, next up we have another quick side detour in Avalon. Now, I mentioned in the Wintertusk section that Eric Weirdrune has a quest at level 35 and 55. You need to do both of those first. So go to Eric Weirdrune in Northgard, finish his quest at 35 and 55, and from there, once you get to Avalon, I believe it's level 72 and 75, Friar Nolan offers more side quests. I believe Fianna Yellowknife in High Road also offers one, and from there, you can get some new spells. Now, while these spells aren't going to be useful for every school, not all of them are going to be fantastic, Myth gets a spell that is really good, and every other school can train that spell with no prerequisites, and that is the spell of Purge. Now, what Purge does is for 2 pips, it will remove 3 weaknesses. This is Cleanse Charm, but technically better. You do need 2 pips, so either get 2 pips or set your Arch Mastery pip to a Myth pip. From there, you can cast a Purge and clear 3 weaknesses. This is going to be really good if you ever get bad jujued or you get weakness spammed, whatever. Again, every single school can train this spell without any prerequisites. Just do the quest, go to Myth, and train it using a training point. Boom, everyone should train Purge. Obviously, every other school also gets a set of spells that can be useful as well. Like I believe Fire gets Detonate, and I think Storm gets Supercharge or something along the lines of that. I don't know. I don't remember all of them, but I do know that you should be doing this on every school just in case you get a useful spell. All right, next up, we have an absolutely huge section that also involves spell quests, and that is to get Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap. Now, you would think, oh, you need to be an Azteca to unlock those, and that is technically true, but there is a prerequisite quest that you need to do before you can do these quests that is in Zafaria. And we technically skipped this one earlier because I mentioned in the enchant section you could train Colossal without doing this. You still need to do this before you get Sharpened Blades. So either way, you're going to have to do it. Basically, once you reach level 66 and have completed Drum Jungle, you need both of those prerequisites. Go to Inyanga White Stripes right here, and he will give you a quest called Bungle in the Jungle, where you go to Drum Jungle, you beat a few side enemies to defeat and collect something, go to Cocoa Smoke Sign and restore the obelisk. From there, you can train Colossal. You likely already have it by this point. From there, however, you can now go to Azteca, and in Azteca, you can do the Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap quests. Now, unfortunately for these, there's another prerequisite, because first you need to do the quest Third Star on the left to unlock the Star Obelisk. So do that quest first as well, and from there you unlock the Star Obelisk. These spells, you could train them if you want to, but realistically they aren't that good. They're kind of a little bit worse than Frenzy or even Berserk, so I probably wouldn't train them. But you do that, then you can get the quest Turn Up the Sun at level 86, and I believe you need to complete Salt Meadow Swamp first. So get the quest Turn Up the Sun from Pakal Red Mask. You go beat up a solo fire boss that has like 15,000 health in the Salt Meadow Swamp. A little bit of a challenge, but nothing too bad. From there, go back to Pakal and restore the Sun Obelisk. This will net you the spells of Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap, which are probably one of the biggest upgrades and power spikes we have ever gotten in this game. What these allow you to do is, as you would imagine, they allow you to sharpen a blade, make it do more damage, or potent a trap and make that do more damage. What this doesn't tell you though is this allows you to stack things. So with a potent trap that makes a feint, for example, a plus 80, then on top of that you can use the regular plus 70 feint for a total of both of them on top of each other. You can do the same thing for blades. This is again probably one of the biggest power spikes in this entire game, potent trap and sharpened blade, and I can't stress enough just how much you need this for progression. So make sure that you do all of these quests before moving on and going further, because Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap are going to be your best friend for years to come. All right, our next major milestone is going to be at level 95, where you can unlock the best Pierce Jewels in the entire game. Now, there is going to be two main ways you can get these. The first one is going to be for console players, because likely you don't have access to the same things that PC players do, and that is from White Razors in Crescent Beach in Chrysalis. So just keep questing through Chrysalis, get up to level 95. Likely at that point you're already at Crescent Beach, or at least close to it, and from there you can farm the White Razors for all of the Pierce Jewels. However, if you were on PC, or you could potentially on console check to just see if this exists, to see if someone has added this, on PC there is a better way to get them, and that is from specific enemies in Mirage. Now, very similar to the Monstrous method, you can go to castle tours, visit a castle, top rated and then top dorms, and then find any of these various Mirage houses. So it's gonna be like the House Siamese apartment, the Drommel dwelling, we have the Hood's hideout. All of those would work, so let's just go to the Hood's hideout just so you can see it, and then walk backwards like you do with the Arcanum, and boom, you're now in Mirage. Now, the reason why this is important is because with this, you can then navigate to the social tab and find someone that is in two main specific places. We want to look for either the Thieves' Den, which you can see there's one here, or Irem Palace. Now, there's only someone in the Thieves' Den right now. Usually there is a set of people who leave a character just there at all times, like a level 1, so you can just teleport using this. However, if they're not here, as they aren't right now, just try to find someone that's in the Thieves' Den. From there, you can teleport to them by double clicking on them. And now you can see, okay, I'm now in battle with the 40 Thieves. The 40 Thieves are one of the major farmable enemies where you can farm these for the different Pierce Jewels. And you can see with 2,250 health, they are going to be good. Even at level 95, you should be more than fine to beat them up. All right, there we go. We beat them, and I did not get a Pierce Jewel. But you do get the Pierce Jewels pretty frequently from these guys, and that is a pretty easy way to access them. Again, if you're on console, just go to the White Razors in Chrysalis and call it a day there. So that's going to be it for this section. All right, we're finally at another major gear milestone with the level 100 gear. Now, similar to the level 60 section, I heavily recommend you go watch my level 100 gear guide, because I don't want to go fully in depth here, because there are a lot of different pieces that are worth farming for level 100. However, let's just talk about the bare minimum, and that is the fact that you should absolutely do all of Castle Darkmoor at least once. Go to Dworgen in Nightside once you hit level 100 and start that quest. From there, you will go through Castle Darkmoor, battling up against Malistaire the Undying for a massive final battle. And the reason why this is so important is, first off, the best themes are from Castle Darkmoor. Very good amulets are from Castle Darkmoor. There's a good set of rings from Aphrodite in Castle Darkmoor, and the robes from Malistaire the Undying are great as well. However, beyond that, there's also the fact that every school gets a spell, a level 100 spell, once you get to this graveyard section, which can be very useful, specifically on Storm and Death on PC and very soon on console edition. They have a base version of that spell, which is really good. Glowbugs and Call of Cthulhu for 5 pips will deal a massive amount of damage, which will replace your 4-pip AoE in your mob deck up until you get the Wallaru AOEs all the way in Wallaru. So keep in mind, definitely worth it to do Castle Darkmoor at least once. As for the other gear, I would just say Chrysalis World Gear is going to be your best friend here, farmed from all of the different final bosses of Chrysalis, like Moros the Death Tree, Archmagus Lorcan, and finally Morganth. All of those bosses give a good set of gear, and beyond that, you also want to make sure you get a pip deck at level 100. Otherwise, there isn't too much to talk about for this. Just watch that gear guide, and the reason why this is so important, I'd just like to reiterate, is level 100 gear. If you get a good setup, you will not need to farm for gear until level 150 with Merciless gear. And beyond that, there isn't really any gear sets to farm between that. The only one is the Catacombs gear, and nobody in their right mind would recommend you to farm Dragoon gear in the year of our Lord 2026. So keep that in mind for the level 100 gear section. This should hold you over for a solid 50 levels if you do it correctly. So go out of your way to farm the best level 100 gear set that you possibly can. All right, we're winding down. There's not much more progression left. At this point, the next major milestone is at level 110 when you're going to come to Qyburn Stellar Gaze right here and train both the Epic spell and the Frenzy spell. Now, this is going to be very important for obviously any deck. First off, Epic is going to be an improvement from Colossal. It's a plus 25, not huge, but you definitely want it. And Frenzy is a staple of most max levels at this point. If you cast it, it's an aura for 4 rounds. It'll give you plus 40% outgoing damage and plus 30% incoming damage. It's very important for attack decks. This is when your attack deck, in my opinion, replace that blade with a Frenzy, call it a day. There you go, perfect. Level 110, next major milestone. Let's move on. This is going to be a big gap. So if you're following this progression guide, the last time that you farmed gear was level 100, and if you followed my gear guide perfectly, you should have very easily been able to quest from levels 100 to 150 without farming gear. If you didn't farm gear, you likely struggled and you didn't follow my progression guide, which leads me to question, why are you even watching this to begin with if you're not listening to what I'm saying? Anywho, level 150 is when the next major gear milestone is, because at the end of Lemuria is when you can farm a full set of Merciless gear. Now, you don't really need to farm a full set, specifically the stuff from the Power Draconian, which I believe is the Amulet and the Athame. You do not realistically need to farm. The rest of it, however, is so very important. Drop from a bunch of different bosses, like from the Hall of Heroes, from the Scion of the Old One. There's a lot of different bosses that drop the Merciless gear. However, the most important aspects of this are going to be the hat, robe, boots, and wand. The rest of it is good, obviously. However, those are going to be the major, most important ones. With a full set of Merciless gear, you should not need to farm gear from right here all the way up until max level, because Merciless gear should be enough to get you through all of Novus, all of Wallaru, and likely all of Darkmoor as well if you are on PC. So keep that in mind. This is the last time I would recommend farming gear before the end game, because Merciless is that good. At least get a hat, robe, boots, and wand. The rest of it, while is good, it's not nearly as important for the setup. The rings are really good as well, but the Athames, amulets can be skipped along with the decks. Whatever, you can farm the decks if you want to. Anyways, let's move on. All right, one final checkpoint before we've reached the end game, and that is the Wallaru AOEs, which you can get around level 163 or so. It's a weird level because you unlock the Wallaru AOEs after completing the Outback section of Wallaru. So the first 2 areas, Hope Springs, Kingsland, and then getting to the Outback. From there, you go to Xander, the Life Professor in the Arcanum, and you can unlock the Wallaru AOEs. The Wallaru AOEs are all incredible. They're going to be what you use first round against mob enemies from when you unlock them up until probably another like 50 levels in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if we use these all the way up until like level 240, 250. I don't know. These are just so very good. They do a really large amount of damage first round, and all you need to do is change your school pip to be another school pip to match the spell. So Drop Bear Fury, Myths requires a fire pip. Switch my deck to a fire pip. Boom, I can use that first round. I have it fully upgraded. It does a ton of damage. Again, you're going to be using these on every single school, and that is going to be the next big milestone. Now, at this point, let's move on to the final point for console, and that is going to be the max level 170 gear. Now, you may have noticed on console, there is Selenopolis and Wallaru, and there is a set of Reaver gear and Avatar gear that are both identical. And you may be asking, why is that? What should I farm? Well, the Avatar gear gear in Selenopolis is going to be massively preferable, specifically for the hat, robe, boots, and wand, than the Reaver gear. And the reason why is that the Reaver gear requires you to be Malice, and Malice is an absolute nightmare, no pun intended. It's just not fun to do, and I could never imagine doing it on console. It's going to suck with no communication. I'd recommend fully skipping it. Don't farm for Reaver gear for hat, robe, and boots. Wait until Avatar gear, which you can farm from Khonsu in Selenopolis, which is just simply going to be the exact same stats, but way easier to farm, and there's a pity system there as well. Now for the Athame, Amulet, Ring, and Deck, you can farm for the Reaver gear because all of this is going to be pretty easy to get and all of the bosses aren't that bad. So you can farm for the Reaver gear there. However, the bigger thing at this level, and this is also important for PC, you could do this as well before doing Darkmoor if you want, there are jewels that are very valuable at this level, and that is the introduction of these new damage jewels, which you need to beat Freddy Croaker 10 times to unlock the ability to craft these. Now what these do, obviously for a circle slot, it adds plus 10% damage. I shouldn't need to tell you that is absolutely insane given the fact that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate circle slots that we can socket things into. Now, what I personally recommend doing for the split, I believe the damage cap currently on console is 235. I would recommend trying to get to around 230 range, and for your armor piercing, try to get up to 35 to 40. That is going to be more than enough for Darkmoor. I actually genuinely really like getting up to 50 nowadays. You don't have to, that is a little bit overkill, especially with the lack of pierce on Reaver and Avatar gear compared to Abomination gear, but you can get up into the 40 range if you want to, and then for damage, stick around the 230 range. I'll leave it up to you whether you even want to farm for these. Realistically, on PC, you could just skip these and then wait until Abomination gear to farm for circle jewels. That honestly might be a little bit better. Now, on top of that, another really good set of jewels is going to be the tier socket jewels that you can also craft right here. Specifically, the Potent Trap Opal and the Feint Citrine are going to be really good. The Feint Citrine is actually a balance feint, which can stack again on top of regular feints. With this, you can get up to like a 5 stack of a feint, which is crazy. And the Potent Trap is going to be another item card that you can put on another feint to stack on top of a regular potent feint. So my point is, these are all really good. You can socket these into a tier slot and then from there use them in battle. And that is it for the console section. I would recommend getting your damage jewels, getting your pierce jewels, and then also getting like a Feint Citrine, and you will be more than fine going into Darkmoor once that finally comes out. Let's quickly go over for PC. All right, for the final section for PC, we have Abomination gear, and Abomination gear is actually incredible. I know it doesn't seem like a major upgrade compared to Reaver, but when you look at it, a lot of it does give quite a bit more damage and quite a bit more pierce, to the point where you probably do want to farm for this. Just look at the Myth Wand. The Myth Wand gives 14 pierce on top of 29 damage. That is absolutely crazy. I mean, a lot of them give an insane amount of pierce as well. This is all a really good set of gear, and the best part is the Darkmoor badges are probably the most lenient pity system badges we've had in a long time. I mean, just look at it. We have like Wallaru 5 times. That's easy. The Greyman Golem 5 times. Sister Sanderson 5 times. These are all really easy things to do, and from there, you can farm for this gear pretty dang easily. On top of that, we have a new set of jewels that give plus 11% damage for some schools. For some schools, I think it gives plus 10%, but the point is, it is a major upgrade. We also have those tier slots that we mentioned before in the last section. Overall, I would just heavily recommend farming for a full set of Abomination gear at this level. There's no reason not to. We have a full like 4 months before the next world comes out. Just get your damage up. I would recommend getting up to that like 40 to 50% pierce range, get up to like the 260 to 270 damage range, and call it a day. And from there, that's pretty much it. So that was an absolute behemoth of a video, and I think I went over everything major. If I did miss something, please leave it in the comments below. Like if you're a max level and you're like, oh, he totally missed this, please leave it in the comments below. But I think I hit everything major. The most important things I wanted to stress in this video are when I do specific things like pet training, when I do specific things like farming gear, and what spells I go out of my way to get. Because of the fact that there are a lot of gear sets in this game and a lot of people don't want to farm gear at every milestone, I mentioned in this, really, you only need to farm gear at levels 60, 100, 150, and max. You don't need to do it outside of that. So again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this useful, make sure to drop a like at the sub button. You can also join and become a channel member if you want to. If not, that's fine as well. But thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.